Welcome everyone to the Masterclass, as Denicio mentioned, about mastering protocol parameters. And of course, that's a topic we cannot really cover in 50 minutes because there are, a lot of protocol parameters, as you will hear. But I'll try at least to give you a good overview of what you need to think about if you want to be a DRep, if you are a DRep, and if you think about, participating in governance. Good. So a quick overview. So I'll give you a brief introduction to the topic, to parameters in general. I'll talk about the non-updatable and updatable protocol parameters and what does that mean for you as a DRep. Then we'll talk about understanding the parameter, the different groups that are there. There are 4 distinct groups. And then we will take a deep dive into these 4 groups. And we call them the updatable protocol parameters. And then one thing that's also very important for you to understand is how can they be changed? So, how can we update parameters? For example, the stake pool target number, the K parameter, or others, of course. There are a lot of others. And then I also prepared for you a nice overview. You can then scan a QR code and it will give you a document that contains a lot of information about parameters. Good. And then hopefully we'll have time for a Q&A. Just really briefly about me, my name is Nicolas Cerny. I'm the governance lead at the Cardano Foundation. I'm all day, every day focused about governance. I'm also contributing in the Intersect, in the Civics Committee, and I'm also part of the Parameters Committee in the Governance Parameters Working Group. And in general, I just try to help people on this governance journey because it can be a bit overwhelming and complicated. Good. So really briefly, why do we talk so much about governance and why is it so important? I mean, as you all know, we're currently transitioning the governance model on Cardano. We're well underway. We're in the bootstrapping phase. So the Genesis keys are gone. And now we have this decentralized governance model where the ADA holders, the ecosystem participants are the ones who are making the decisions. And one of these roles in this tricameral model that we have on Cardano are the delegated representatives, the DReps for short. And they're very important because this is the role who is basically voting on Cardano. These are the ADA holders who are deciding either to step up themselves and register themselves as DReps, or the ADA holders who are delegating to other DReps. So if you feel like someone else is representing you better, or there is a group potentially that's representing you better, then you can do that. And then, active participation in governance. This really ensures that Cardano's continued decentralization and evolution. And understanding protocol parameters is key for DReps because this is one of the things that they need to understand when they vote on governance actions. Good. So as I said, we have this tricameral governance model on Cardano, where we have these 3 roles, the delegated representatives, the stake pool operators, and the constitutional committee. As I said, the DReps, they are the ones who either represent ADA holders or are ADA holders themselves, who nominated themselves, and they vote on all governance actions. And very importantly, like public permissionless nature of Cardano, anybody can register as a DRep. So as long as you have the 500 ADA deposit that is required to register, you can register as a DRep. The stake pool operators, their main responsibility is to run and operate the network, but they also have a role to play in this governance model on Cardano. They will have to vote on especially security-related parameters, governance actions, And the voting power for the DReps, that is stake-based. So I wrote down 1 Lovelace, 1 vote because that is the precise way. You can also phrase it as 1 ADA, 1 vote. And the same is for the SPOs. Then there's a 3rd role, the constitutional committee. And this constitutional committee, they have a special role because they do not give their opinion about governance actions. They're not here to make decisions like that. Their role is to interpret the constitution and assess whether governance actions adhere to that constitution and the guardrails, also very important to mention. So they are the ones, basically there's a governance action, they need to review it, they need to check, does it adhere to the constitution? If yes, approve, if no, disapprove. So basically that's what they do. And their voting power is one member, one vote. So one constitutional committee member has one vote. Good. And now also really briefly, we have 7 governance action types. And as you can see right now, we're after Cheng number 1. We're in the bootstrapping phase of governance, and there are currently 3 governance action types that are available and that can be proposed on chain, which is info action, protocol parameter changes, and that's a very important one, and of course the hard fork initiation, because you need to also, of course, have a way how you can initiate the next hard fork, which is the Cheng number 2 hard fork, which will introduce all the other 4 governance action types. For example, treasury withdrawal. Yeah, that is usually the one people talk about. We have the new constitution or guardrail script. And then the first 2 actions, the motion of no confidence and update committee threshold, they are the ones who are affecting the constitutional committee. So they affect this role. But enough about the governance model and the governance actions. Let's talk about protocol parameters. So what are protocol parameters, right? I mean, if we just summarize it, they are the configurable settings that define Cardano's blockchain behavior. And they are the underlying settings that define how things work on Cardano. To really simplify it. They're important because they influence everything, right? The network parameters influence the network in a way, the economic parameters, the economic model of Cardano, and so forth, right? Security, and of course now the governance parameters that we have as well. And how can those be changed? We'll go into more details later, but they can be changed either via on-chain governance actions, or if we're talking about non-updatable parameters, via software update, via a change of the Genesis files and the node version. So that's how they can, like, all the parameters can be updated in one way or another. Just not everything can be updated via governance actions. Yeah, and now I basically already spoiled that. So those are the non-updatable parameters. And what are those? Those are parameters that cannot be changed via governance actions, on-chain actions. And they are hard-coded into the protocol via the Genesis files. And they require, if you want to change them, a software update. And just some examples, because in this presentation, I will talk more about the updatable parameters that you actually as DReps need to vote on. But just some examples for the non-updatable parameters is, of course, the total Lovelace supply, so the 45 billion cap that we all know and love. Then the slot length, the slots on Cardano, and also, for example, the system start time. So when did the system originally start operation? Yeah, so why do you as a DRep, or why do DReps in general need knowledge about the protocol, the parameters, and the updatable, non-updatable parameters? Because DReps are the one who are voting on the changes of these parameters. So they ideally, right, should be informed and have an understanding of what could happen if they change parameters in a reckless way, right? They can have an impact. It can impact, everything, because the parameters are the underlying settings of the protocol. So decisions on these parameters affect everything. Because if you change, for example, the transaction fee, you make Cardano less accessible if you hike it too much, right? You make it so that people, maybe from emerging markets, that they cannot contribute anymore, or businesses become unviable because some settings just do not fit their requirements. And it's the responsibility of the DReps to ensure the changes of the parameters are benefiting the ecosystem, right? And not just one group or one entity, because the parameters affect us all as ecosystem participants. So they need to make sure that these changes are not destroying the network, basically. And then, of course, DReps represent their delegates. They make their own decisions, right? So a DRep makes up their mind and votes how they see fit, but they also need to consider the interests of their delegators, right? And ideally, as a delegator, right, you should also have the understanding, or you should be able to, I know we usually say don't trust but verify, but sometimes you also need to trust and need to make sure that your DReps also have an understanding of what they're voting on. All right, and now let's take a look at the different groups of parameters, of the updatable parameters. There are 4 distinct groups of protocol parameters according to the specifications in CIP 1694, and also the way it's, the parameter update governance action works. And the first one is the network parameters. The network parameters, I really try to simplify it here. So they ensure efficient data transmission and processing within the Cardano blockchain. There's more to it, obviously, but I try to really simplify it. And when you think about the goals of managing the network parameters, right, they need to match the available Cardano blockchain layer 1 network capacity to current or future traffic demands. And then, of course, when we think about future demands on the network, you also need to think about the different user groups that are available there and that transact on the network. And now let's take a look at the actual network parameters that are part of this group that you can update, that can be potentially voted on via governance, via the parameter change governance actions. And for the network parameters, those are these. So we have the max block body size, which is the maximum size of a block in bytes. So it's around 90 kilobytes. Then we have the max transaction size, which is the, very self-explanatory, the maximum size of a transaction in bytes, which is around 16.5 kilobytes. And same for the block header, which is 1.1 kilobytes. So here I really try to also, you'll have access to these slides at a later stage, so you can understand what these parameters do. And then we have also 2 parameters that, that affect scripts. So here we have the maximum script execution units in a single transaction, and also the maximum script execution units in a single block. And those are the network parameters. And one thing that is also important to mention is, as a DRep, right, or in general on Cardano, I said we have the constitution and we have the guardrails. The constitution, they define our principles, our requirements, and what our values and how the governance system works. But the guardrails, on the other hand, they define basically the upper and lower bound limits for these parameters. So for example, there's guardrail for all of those different parameters, and they define what is the minimum value that we can set the block body size, or what is the max value we can set the max block body size. And these guardrails, they were defined by experts also from the parameters committee, where we have community members from the IOG team, CF team, and from a lot of other organizations who are participating and who came up with these guardrails, because they need to make sure that we do not break the system by changing a parameter. So these are the network parameters. And now let's also briefly talk about the economic parameters. And the economic parameters, they influence the financial economic aspects of the Cardano network. And when we think about managing economic parameters, we always need to consider the long-term economic sustainability of Cardano, right? Especially when we think about the diminishing reserves. It's a reality, right? They are depleting. It's a well-known fact. There's a parameter for that. You'll see that. So when managing those parameters, this is something that needs to be considered. Another thing is, of course, that one of the, the economic model on Cardano is also providing economic security, basically, right? By having delegators, having stake participate. We need to make also sure that the SPOs and the delegators are adequately rewarded, right? This is crucial for the security of Cardano as well. And when we think about economic incentives and how to balance them, right? We do not just have one group, one persona group, but we have a few. So there are the SPOs, of course, the delegators, the ADA holders. I know SPOs are also ADA holders, but bear with me. Then we also need to consider DeFi users, and a lot of others, and of course developers as well. And now I'll give you an overview of the different economic parameters. And as I mentioned before, we have the transaction fee. And the transaction fee, for those who didn't know, it's basically, there are two parameters for them. There's a base transaction fee in Lovelace that is fixed, which is around 0.16 ADA. And then we have, the transaction fee per byte, which is the dynamic part of this transaction fee, which is that on top of the fixed fee, you have per byte of data, also 44 Lovelace. And then that's how the transaction fee is calculated. Another thing is we also have the UTXO cost per byte, which defines the costs for storage in UTXOs. And that is, and where did I get that data? Because I think that's also very important. I'll come to that later. In the overview, you will see there's a beautiful page on Cardano Scan where you see the parameters. There's a beautiful page on the Beta Explorer of the Cardano Foundation, and a few other great places where you can find all these values. So you don't need to just look at these slides, but there's actually a dashboard for that. And then, of course, everything that we know. I hope all of you who have ADA also delegate their ADA, and you have self-custody. And if you don't, please do so. So there is the stake address deposit, which is the deposit amount that is charged when you register your stake key. So you maybe remember when you set up your ADA wallet and you delegate it to a pool, there's this 2 ADA deposit, and if you deregister your stake key, then you get that back. It's a deposit, right? Same thing applies also to the stake pools. So if you register a stake pool, you have the stake pool deposit, which is currently 500 ADA. And again, I want to remind you, right, these are all updatable parameters. So with this future protocol parameter change governance action, well, actually, you can also do that right now. It's available right now in the bootstrapping phase. All these parameters could be changed. And then we have more economic parameters. Another one is also that was heavily discussed last year. I don't see so much discussion about it right now, which is the min pool cost. That is also for stake pools, and here it's the minimum pool cost per epoch, which enables the pledge effect, and that is 170 ADA. So this is the amount that, the lowest possible minimum pool cost. This is 170 ADA right now. Last year it was lowered from 340 ADA to 170, and now we have it at 170. And now we come to they're all interesting, but very, very, I just want to emphasize they're very important. The treasury cut, governance parameter, economic parameter, which is the treasury cut portion of the monetary expansion. So let me just take a step back, and I need to explain that with the monetary expansion parameter. So this 0.3% is the amount, it's not the amount, it's the percentage that flows out of the reserves. So 0.3% each epoch flows out of the reserves. Then there's let's just imagine there's this bucket. And in this bucket, the transaction fees that were collected in this epoch also flow into. Then, so in this bucket, we have the monetary, the 0.3 from the reserves, the transaction fees. And then 20% of that goes to the treasury, and 80% goes to the stake pool operators and the delegators as rewards. So for those SPOs who are producing blocks, they get rewarded. And if they produce the block, a stake pool, right, the 170 ADA is taken from this rewards, excuse me for a lack of a better term, but so this is how it works. So you need to think about, you have the 0.3% of the monetary expansion parameter. This is the outflow of the reserves. That goes into, let's just imagine a bucket. This bucket gets then also added with the transaction fees. And then ideally, and per the parameter, the reality is a bit different, right? It's not exactly 20%, but 20% of this big bucket then goes to the treasury, and 80% should and ideally goes to the stake pool operators and the delegators. So this is something that's very, very important to understand how this works. And right, as we see, as we have a 0.3% outflow in the reserves, we have a decline in the reserves. So eventually they will deplete. Also something to keep in mind. I mean, they will never really deplete, yeah, I know, but let's just say they will be near zero eventually. And then one other parameter is the execution unit price. And this defines the fees for executing Pluto scripts, and it gives an economic return for Pluto script execution. And that is, there is the execution unit price per step and then per memory. Yeah. And then the last one on this list is the min fee reference script coins per byte. Oh, it's a tongue twister. But yeah, so this defines the cost for using Pluto's reference scripts in Lovelace, and that's 15 Lovelace. Oh, I think, yeah, we have been, sorry. All right, and then the third group of the, we're almost through, two more, bear with me. We have the technical and security parameters. So this group, they guide the operation and performance of the network and also of the Pluto's scripts. I mean, they're also part of the network. Yes, and why is it so important, or what are the goals when managing the technical parameters and security parameters? It's of course to ensure the security of the Cardano blockchain network in terms of decentralization, protection against Sybil and 51% attacks, and also denial of service attacks, right? And what they also do is they enable changes to the Pluto's cost model, which is also currently being proposed, and there's going to be a governance, there's actually going to be a parameter change governance action very soon. Yeah, so now we're going to talk about a very controversial parameter, which is the stake pool target num, or K parameter. I think that's probably how you know that parameter. And this one, the description, the definition of it, this defines the target number of stake pools, also known as K, impacts the saturation threshold and encourages the growth of stake pools. And the best way to think about this is, so in an ideal world, well, maybe let's not call it ideal, in a theoretical world, right, we would have, with the current ADA that is in circulation, right, so all the ADA that's not in the reserves or in the treasury, the ideal stake pool number would be 500. 500 fully saturated pools, which is, I think, around 74 million ADA, something like that. But, right, it's this number does not mean we only can have 500 pools. We currently have more than 3,000 stake pools on Cardano, and around 1,000 pools produce blocks per epoch. So 1,000 different pools produce blocks on average in an epoch, which is really, really great. And for me personally, I expected as soon as we switched, or after the Chang hard fork, the first Chang hard fork, I was expecting that we immediately gonna have a stake pool target num change proposal, but we didn't. But I expect that to come soon. So this is probably, if you're a DRep, this is probably something where you should do some additional research about that parameter. And then, of course, we also have the pool pledge influence, which enables the pledge protection mechanism for stake pools, and higher values reward pools that have more pledge and penalize pools that have less pledge. Is the pool pledge influence parameter working as intended right now? I mean, that can be debated, right? I don't want to give my opinion now about that, but yeah, this is also something that should be looked into, right? I mean, this is the question about having skin in the game, and should skin in the game really be, yeah, I didn't say I want to give my opinion, but I think skin in the game should be considered. And here I gave my opinion. All right. And then, and of course there are trade-offs, right? It depends. Then another parameter is the pool retire max epoch. And this defines just when a pool retires, they can say that basically in the 18 epochs is the amount in the future when they have to retire. So this is the maximum amount of notice, that's the word I was missing, that a pool can give when planning to retire. So let's just think I have a stake pool, I want to retire, it's epoch 500 and I want to retire. So the maximum amount of when I can set it for retiring is 518. Yeah. Then another parameter now, this does not have anything to do with stake pools. This is the collateral percentage. And this defines how much collateral must be provided when executing a Pluto script as a percentage of the normal execution costs. And then, we have three more of the technical security parameters. That is the max collateral inputs, so the maximum number of inputs that can be used for collateral when you execute a Pluto script. And two more on this list, which is the max value size. This is the limit on the serialized size of the value in each output. And then the last one is this cost model, the Pluto's cost model that I mentioned. And here we currently already have now with, not now, but with the Chang number 1 hard fork, a new Pluto's cost model was implemented. It is the Pluto's version 3 cost model, but we still have the version 1 and version 2 also in the Genesis files. And now, last but not least, right? All of them are important. Oops. These are the governance parameters. And the governance parameters, what they do, right? They define how our on-chain governance model works on Cardano. So how are the different thresholds? How high are they? What is the deposit amount for the governance action, and so forth? And the goal, right, when you manage these parameters, is to, of course, ensure that we have stability in the system. I mean, this applies to all of the groups. So it's not just for governance, but especially if you think about governance, stability, and making sure that we can actually make changes, right? Because you can think about a scenario where you set the threshold too high, for example, for stake pools, right? And then you never reach this threshold, which basically locks you in a stalemate until you reach that. And this can be very, very problematic. That's why I'll also share that later. Currently, the stake pool thresholds for all the voting thresholds are 51%. And I'll share more about that. And then, of course, another goal is to maintain a representative form of governance as outlined in the CIP 1694 and in the Constitution. Good, so let's take a look at the governance parameters. So the first one is how much ADA is required, the Gov deposit, to actually submit a governance transaction on chain. This is anybody who submits an action needs to provide 100,000 ADA as a deposit, right, to even propose a governance action on chain. This value was set not to prevent spam on the network perspective, but if you think about the three roles, right, the DReps, the Constitutional Committee, the SPOs, usually behind those are humans, human actors, and they only have limited time. So if there are, 1,000 proposals to review, what happens is that people do not have the resources to look at that, and they do not have the time to look at them. So the deposit was set that high because when we think about governance, the actual action on chain is the last part of this whole discussions, of this whole governance process. Before an action is even submitted on chain, this is where you should have already some understanding of, does the community support my proposal? Do I have some advocates that support my cause? So for me, the biggest part about governance and governance action is that the actual consensus making and finding coalitions and talking about things that happens off chain. And the last part is then submitting it on chain. Yeah. The second parameter on this list is the DRep deposit, and it's actually the same as the stake pool deposit with 500 ADA. So for those of you who already decided to register as a DRep, you had to deposit 500 ADA, and it's a parameter that can be adapted. And then the third one is the DRep activity, which is 20 epochs, and that means that if you, let's just imagine I sign up as a DRep right now, and I do not vote on anything, right? I signed up, so I am an active DRep. I'm considered active. But if I do not vote in 20 epochs, I am considered as inactive, and then the stake that is delegated to me, so all of my delegators that delegate to me, their voting power is then considered as an abstain vote. So that's the best way to think about it. And if you are voting once again, so I'm inactive, but as soon as I vote on a governance action, I'm again considered active. So 20 epochs is the time when, so let's say 19 epochs, DReps can just put up their legs and do nothing. But for the last epoch, that's when they need to vote, and then it starts anew, right? So every time a DRep votes, this clock starts ticking again. And then, right, we have thresholds for all the different governance action types that the different roles can vote on. So we have voting thresholds for the DReps and for the SPOs, and I'll share that in a bit. Yes, and then the other very important governance parameters are the Gov action lifetime, which defines basically the period as a whole number of epochs after which a governance action will expire if it's not enacted. And the Gov action lifetime, so a Gov action stays, is able to gather support and gather votes for 6 epochs. So after submitting it, it's going to be available for voting for 6 epochs. So during that time, DReps can vote on it, SPOs, if they're able to, can vote on it, and the Constitutional Committee can vote on that. And if a governance action is not able to gather enough support, right, it can happen, it's an unpopular proposal, I try to change a parameter without doing my due diligence and doing a technical analysis and technical review. So rightfully, it doesn't get enacted, it doesn't get ratified. That means after 6 epochs, the deposit that I had to pay, which is the 100,000 ADA, just gets returned to my address or another address that I specified, and that's it. But during that time, right, during these 6 epochs, it also doesn't mean that the governance action needs to run for 6 epochs and then only at the end it's checked for ratification. No, at every epoch boundary between the submission of the action and the end of the 6 epochs, it's checked. So at each epoch boundary, a governance action is checked if the different thresholds are met. So for example, if I want to do a treasury withdrawal, I need approval from the DReps, and I need the assessment of the constitutionality of the CC. And if I gather already the support from these groups in the 3rd epoch, then lucky me. And the proposal is ratified, and then 1 epoch later it's enacted. Then there are 2 other parameters that affect the constitutional committee. That is the committee max term length. And that is the length in epochs, the maximum term that a committee member may serve. And the best way to think about this currently, each constitutional committee member, they have a credential. They have a credential that is specified in the Conway Genesis file. And next to that credential, there is a number. That number is an epoch number. And if you want to add a new constitutional committee member to that list, which will be possible after Cheng number 2, you specify the credential and then the epochs. So how long should this credential be a constitutional committee member? And that can be maximum 146 epochs in the future. So that's the maximum amount, and that is 2 years. We specify it as epochs because that's how we measure, that's our definition of time on Cardano and slots. And of course you can, I know some of you are very technical and you can say epochs, that the amount of slots per epoch can be changed, but that is one of the non-updatable parameters. So we'll not go into that. But yeah. And the last parameter of this list is the committee min size. And I mean, also, what I like about these parameter names, they're very self-explanatory, but let me just explain it as well. So here, that specifies the least number of members that can be included in a constitutional committee. And this is currently 7. So at the moment, we have 7 interim constitutional committee members, and the parameter, the committee min size value currently is 7. So in the future, if you want to have, I don't know, less than 7 committee members, that needs to be first changed with a parameter update. Yeah. So we need to at least have 7. You can have more. Ideally, in the future, we have more committee, constitutional committee members, but for now, it's 7. And now, as promised, and yes, I'm bombarding you with tables today, but now let's look at the different voting thresholds. And as I said, DReps have specific thresholds for all the different governance action types that they can vote on, and DReps can vote on every governance action, so there's a threshold for every governance action type. So the first one is the motion of no confidence. I mean, let's speed up a bit, but we have the motion of no confidence, the committee normal update, which is 67% of the active DReps, so the stake that is considered active. That means it's delegated to active DReps or the no confidence DReps. That needs to be 67% of this total amount. Then the committee no confidence. This I need to explain a bit because we have committee normal and committee no confident. And for those, right, when we think about the constitutional committee, there can be 2 states of that committee. You can have the committee in confidence, let's call it the normal state, and then you can have it in no confidence, which means that the motion of no confidence governance action was proposed, was ratified, and then enacted. And that means, if that happens, that the current constitutional committee is thrown out. So that is very drastic and very, very hard thing to do. I mean, it's a very interesting thing to do. And then we also have the update to constitution. This is the highest one of this list, because what this allows you to do is to modify the constitution or the guardrail script. And I mean, the constitution, right, we have an interim one that is currently on chain. It's specified with the hash of the constitution and the URL. But in the future, we might have to change that, and we will actually change that. There is a new constitution that's being worked on. Many of you have joined these constitution workshops, and yeah, the threshold to change the constitution is 75%. All right, yeah, and then here, let's just highlight the protocol parameter change governance action. So as a DRep, as I said, you can vote on all of the governance action types. One of them is the protocol parameter changes, and the threshold to change the network group, the economic group, or the technical group is 67%, and then the governance group is 75%. And 75% because changing protocol parameters would then allow you to, for example, change the constitution, and as the constitution changes the highest value, it should be the same for changing a governance, changing the parameter. And then, of course, the treasury withdrawal is 67%. Yeah, and now let's quickly go over the process of how you can change parameters, actually, the on-chain process. As I said, I mean, the title says on-chain process and the first point is off-chain, but yeah, so the discussions happen off-chain, obviously, but then once somebody submits an action, right, you need the 100,000 ADA for the deposit, and you need to specify exactly the values that you want to set the parameters, and when you submit the action, it is checked against the guardrail script. So if you want to change a parameter and it's outside of the boundary, so it's lower than the min and higher than the max, then the guardrail script does not allow you to submit the transaction. And yes, I said allow, and there's a more technical term about that, but for lack of a better word, let's just go with that. And then after you submit the action and it's within the guardrails, you had the 100,000 ADA deposit, you were able to build the transaction, you then submit it, and then whoever is allowed to vote on it, so definitely the DReps, because they vote on everything. The constitutional committee needs to check the constitutionality of the action. And if we think about hard fork initiations or about protocol parameters that are security related, then also the SPOs vote on them. And as I explained before, it is then checked at each epoch boundary for ratification. So if the thresholds are met or not, if they are, it is ratified. And then one epoch later, so at the next epoch boundary, it's then enacted on chain. And of course, off-chain process, there's more to that. But as I said, there is a parameter change proposal process from the parameters committee, where anybody in the community can submit potential updates to parameters and then have the parameter committee look at that, right? It's a formalized process. It's in the Cardano forum. There's a dedicated section that can be looked at. There's currently, I don't know, like 4 or 5 of these parameter change proposals that are open. It's accessible to anyone. And of course, what I didn't wrote down there is that you can have, I mean, discussions happen wherever people are, right? You can have them on X, you can have them on the forum, on Reddit, you name it, Telegram, Line. So there's a lot of channels, and that's where a lot of these discussions will take place. Yeah, and then really quickly, changing non-updatable parameters. While they're called non-updatable, you can change them. And what this requires is that a node update, change of the node, and what this requires, similar with any hard fork or any node upgrade, is of course that SPOs implement it. SPOs actually use that updated node software, and examples for that, as we said before, non-updatable parameters is the total ADA supply, 45 billion, or the changing other parameters, non-updatable parameters. Good, and now, as I promised, I try to summarize everything and all the resources I used, so Cardano Scan, Beta Explorer, reports on this, not on this QR code, but what's behind the QR code, not the curtain, but the actual page that opens. So that's where you can find a lot of resources, and I hope that it's working. I tested it. Good. Yeah, so feel free to download, share that, and I'll also, of course, make everything available later. Yes, so key takeaways. As a DRep, you need to have a good understanding about the protocol parameters, non-updatable or updatable, doesn't matter. You should have an understanding because you need to vote on them. You as a DRep, you play a very important role in the future of Cardano. You vote on governance decisions. And good decisions, right? I mean, good is something that we can also discuss about for 50 minutes. What does good mean? But if you have an idea, if you are informed about the parameters, the network in general, right, that you need to govern now, you hopefully will make better decisions. So my wish, or what I would, what's the call to action, is stay informed about protocol parameters. It's not as scary as it sounds. It's really, there are really good resources, and I know there's more coming up. There's great reports about them. The parameter committee is always available, and participate in governance. And participating doesn't mean you need to be a DRep. Yeah, you can be that, but you can also just join the conversation, make your voice heard, and be part of this whole governance transformation on Cardano. Because if we have a lot of different voices from different perspectives, this is how we're gonna have, this is how we set ourselves up for success. And then, of course, do not try to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great resources and tools available. And thank you so much for your time. Good. Are there any questions? Or
Which one, like, is this a combination? Oh, sorry. Okay. The min UTXO, which we have when we, for example, mint an NFT onto the chain, is that a combination of parameters, or because you mentioned a few parameters and ADA values, but when you mint an NFT, it's around like 1.456 ADA. So is that a combination, or is that something else that can't be changed?
No, that is something that can be changed.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. It's one of those parameters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Good.
I want to ask is it necessary? The room is very small. So I want to ask about, from your research on governance, besides the model of, like, let's say, one ADA, one vote, or one DRep, one vote, or like one member, one vote, is there any other interesting models, especially for different kind of policy? So I can understand if it's setting on fees, I mean, one ADA, one vote makes sense to me. But if it's something else, then, maybe one ADA, one vote is not great. So is there any advice for that, or any interesting models on governance that you have seen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a lot of different ways how you can think about voting, right? I mean, right now, when we think about what do we implement right now on Cardano, really, it's a minimum viable governance model that gets us started. And what it allows us to do in the future is also to change it. Because governance is the way how you can actually change things. And in the way that we do it here is in a democratic way, where the actual ADA holders, the participants in the ecosystem have an influence. And it's not just an elected council of technocrats, technocracy, that decides everything. So, I mean, there are ways with conviction voting where you maybe lock up your tokens in a way and then they get more voting power. Polkadot is doing something like that. A lot of other ecosystems are doing something like that. You can also, in the future, think about doing a merit-based system, right, where you look at how much do specific, I don't know, let's say if there's an address, right, that does a lot of transactions and it's very active on Cardano, I know you can game the system, but maybe those who are actually producing more fees on Cardano, they should have a bigger say because they're contributing more to the economic stability of the system. But yeah, there's a lot of things, so, and a lot of trade-offs as well. Yeah, but good question. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.